This is a Q&A lesson on correcting bad habits, either in your practicing or your technique or whatever musical element that you're looking to correct. So thank you to all my Patreon followers who have submitted questions. And if you like these free lessons and you're interested in supporting the site, there's a link for my support page in the YouTube description. So what I'll do here is I think I'm going to start by just giving some general tips about improving upon bad habits before I start answering every question, because I can refer back to these tips and I'm going to have to be somewhat brief. There's a lot of people's questions to answer. So I've grouped some together, I've paraphrased them, but there's still lots to go through. So I think I'll start with some generalized tips. The other thing I noticed is that a lot of people's comments or questions are related to technique issues that they have. And one thing I'll just say right away is that you don't necessarily have to think of those as bad habits. It might be you might be being too hard on yourself in that regard. Your technique is where it's at and you're looking to improve it at all times. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad habit. This lesson today it's about the idea of correcting bad habits rather than improving your technique. I'll try to give you some tips on how to improve your techniques as well, but this is more about the idea of correcting bad habits. So maybe a bad habit is something that you can actually already do, but you aren't doing it for some reason, or you need some kind of encouragement or some kind of plan to make sure that you do it. So, practicing music in many ways is it's a self-improvement lifestyle choice. It's something that you're going to practice forever and you're always going to be improving. So don't be too hard on yourself by saying you have bad habits necessarily. Sometimes it's just you have to work on your technique, and so does everyone. Even the best professionals still work on their technique. And their other musical ideas as well. So some generalized tips. First thing right off the bat, you have to clearly identify issues and create a plan to solve them. And we're not talking about perfecting the perfection of an issue. If you have a problem with slurs, you're not looking to perfect your slurs. That's kind of impossible. I mean, I don't know a single professional guitarist that doesn't still work on their slurs. So it's more about taking a look at your technique and saying, is there something that needs to be corrected rather than maintained or refined? So, really looking at the technique, identifying it, and creating a plan. So putting together some specialized exercises, not generalized exercises, not maintenance exercises, but specialized exercises that will help your technique. A maintenance exercise might be just something like, an exercise you do every day. That's not necessarily going to make your slurs improve. If the snappiness of your hammer-ons isn't very clear, maybe you have to take the right hand out of the situation and practice just the tap. That might be an actual solution to a problem. That's like a technique that would be zeroing in on the issue rather than just kind of playing. If you're playing, you're not necessarily going to improve. You're just kind of maintaining whatever thing that you already do. So yeah, identifying the issue and creating a plan to solve it. Another tip would be practice your techniques or whatever musical idea you're working on. Could be phrasing and dynamics, but practice it at the beginning of your practice session, or at least near the beginning of your practice session, so that as you go through the rest of your practice session, at least it's been in your mind already. It's at the top of your mind. You've got some ideas flowing. And then when you're practicing your pieces, hopefully that bleeds into your repertoire practice. And also you can take, after doing a dedicated session on a topic, you can do a micro session during a piece. You finish a phrase, and then you say I really need to work on this, my dynamics there. So you do a little dynamic exercise using dynamics, and then you try it out on the piece. So you can do little micro sessions during your pieces. But it just gets your mind turning in the right way and gets that idea planted. And if you practice it at the very start of your session, especially your bad habits, I think you have a better chance of, over the long term, of solving that issue and growing upon your progress on that issue. Another tip would be, like I just said, like doing little micro workshops of the issue during your actual pieces, so that it's not all clumped together into a technique session necessarily, but during your pieces you are adding a little dedicated session. It could just be 30 seconds long, but you're adding it often and maybe scattered throughout your entire practice session. If it's a real bad habit, let's say it's a posture habit, maybe at the end of each phrase that you do, of all your pieces, at the end of each phrase, you check your alignment and you relax, and then you continue with the next phrase. It becomes something that permeates your entire practice session. Another tip would be find exercises that force the awareness of an issue. So for example, if students don't play on their fingertips, one thing I'll sometimes have them do is play the open string underneath it. So I'll go like C, open E, C sharp, open E, D sharp, D, open E, D sharp, open E. Because if a student is flat fingered and not on their fingertip, the open string will be muted. I do this with kids. I give them this exercise because when they go home, the exercise will remind them of what I need them to work on. So I love those kinds of exercises because not just for kids, but sometimes people's minds, their concentration goes down and they get mentally fatigued during their practice session. But if the exercise is reminding you, like, oh, I got to curve my fingers and be on my fingertips, then the exercise itself can wake you up and draw attention towards the actual issue. So the more exercises and variety of exercises that you have at your disposal to bring your awareness to the forefront is really useful to have. Like another thing, like for people's right hands that are too collapsed and they're not using their upper joints, lots of flamenco and rasgueado exercises can really bring that into awareness. The exercise itself, it doesn't make any sense with bad right hand technique. Like rasgueado kind of requires that your hand is in a good kind of position, is a little bit away from the guitar, but just enough to like use the full finger to extend. So those are great exercises to address a right hand issue. And people can do it every once in a while in their practice session, do a couple of those to remind themselves how to use the fingers. So exercises that force the awareness of an issue. And I'll be addressing some of those as I answer the questions. Another tip would be combine phrasing ends with corrective behavior. I already kind of mentioned this, but at the end of each phrase that you play, you can do something to correct a bad habit. And it can become muscle memory. So for example, tension issues, like when students have shoulder tension and neck tension issues, at the end of a phrase, if I get them to, if you do this like 100 times, and at the end of the phrase, each time you relax your shoulders at the very end of the phrase, it becomes part of your muscle memory, just like the muscle memory that tells your fingers like where to shift and what notes to play. It becomes built into your technique. So at the end of each phrase that you play in a piece, if it's that kind of piece, building in that awareness of an issue such as relaxation will allow you to play music most of the time in your practice session, but work on an issue at the same time. So it doesn't have to be dedicated sessions all the time, but you can build these little practice habits into your practicing that will really help you in the long run, and it can become part of your muscle memory. So I think especially the idea of using phrases as the set length of time that you'll play before correcting a behavior, it's really musical because you should be kind of playing your music and identifying the phrasing and playing from point A to point B. Wherever you think the phrase ends is fine. Like you don't have to be a music theorist or something like that. You just, when there's a pause in the music, you correct something. If you have a technique issue at the end of that phrase, check your right hand position. Oh, it's okay. I'll keep going. Or, adjust it at the end of each phrase. That way you're playing tons of great music. You're working on your phrasing, but you're also working on the issue at hand. And that idea just goes along with the idea of practicing smaller chunks of music and taking breaks, but being aware of things more often. So you just want to be aware of things more often. Some people will work on a problem and then they kind of play their pieces. But then while they're playing their pieces, they forget about that problem. Bring it all into the piece. Bring it all in and make a practice method for yourself that allows you to work on it throughout the music without disrupting your enjoyment of playing or your enjoyment of the musical phrases. You're working it all together. Another tip would be track your progress. I do this with metronome work all the time. I'm a real big fan of just practicing ultra slowly with a metronome with some passages. And I just write the metronome speed down that I'm at. And after a few weeks, I cross off the metronome marking and just go up by 1. And after a few weeks, I have like 20 metronome markings, all with cross lines on them. And I'm like, I can see my progress. I can see it on the page with little pencil marks, how much progress I've been making, which allows me to not just drift through practicing, or feel like, oh, I don't know if I'm making any progress. This is such a hassle, this music thing. But no, instead you can you want to do something so you can see your progress. If you want, you can record yourself and watch what you were doing 3 weeks ago. And sometimes it's just amazing. You're like, oh, that's how I was playing it 3 weeks ago. I'm so much better now. But it's hard to see that on a day-to-day basis because we're self-critiquing so much that we can be very hard on ourselves. So you want to make sure that you can see the rewards of your hard work and that you're tracking that progress. So overall, it's just the idea of working solutions into your practice sessions and rewards as well. Whatever it is that can bring you a little bit of joy that you're improving and just turning it upside down, not being hard on yourself, but instead congratulating yourself for doing the progress and the work that you wanted to do. Like I said, it's like a self-improvement lifestyle choice. Let's answer some questions now, and I'll try to refer back to those ideas. So John just left a comment more than anything, but he said, I think correcting bad habits comes with having an in-person instructor who can observe your playing and make suggestions. And absolutely correct, John. Yeah. A teacher will streamline the process to identifying the issue and creating a plan to solve it. Absolutely. As a student, though, it is a bad habit that students have that they'll kind of identify the issue but not create the clear plan. So you want to, as a musician, start the process of becoming aware of how to identify an issue and how to identify how you're going to solve it. One great thing to do is to have a lot of method books and a lot of technique books and see how other teachers, multiple teachers, suggest tackling a problem. The more that you're aware of various approaches and how teachers go about it, the more that you'll become aware of how to self-identify and self-correct as well. So, but absolutely, a teacher is very helpful. So Juan, Herb, and Michael all had similar questions, so I'm kind of paraphrasing here and combining. Their issue or bad habit was not setting aside time for dedicated technique practice. So they're playing the repertoire lots, but maybe they create the technique routine, but they just don't stick with it. And also not letting boredom, laziness, strength, volume fatigue, or repetition turn us off technique work. Yeah, that's a huge issue for a lot of people. I know that this is people's just their hobby. And so becoming super strict about creating a routine and stuff like that isn't everyone's cup of tea. So nevertheless, one thing I recommend is that as whether you're a professional guitarist or a hobbyist guitarist or musician, we practice technique, and it's just something we do. We don't actually question it much. We just kind of do it. But I recommend that you do it at the start of your practice session, and make it a small amount. Balance your technique session with small and short maintenance exercises. So you can go through very short and a small amount of maintenance exercises very quickly at the beginning of your session. That's like scales, slurs, arpeggios, 1 or 2 stretch things, and finger independence and stuff, and bar chords for the intermediate students. So, it can be a very short routine, but just make it short, make it efficient, and never so long that you get tired or bored. You can do specialized technique work and corrective issues in the middle of your practice session or elsewhere. I like to do most of my stuff at the beginning, so it permeates my practice session. But nevertheless, you short and efficient, but just do it every time. So your consistency over a long term is the most important thing. The length of your technique session is not so important. You can make it super short. Just do a little bit of each thing, just to make sure you're maintaining things. But like I said, other issues, you can spread it out through your practice session. And if you're playing a piece with lots of slurs, maybe, right before that piece, you can practice your slurs or something like that. Break it up, track your progress, all those things I said before. Also realize that, your short-term technique goals and your long-term technique goals are kind of different. There's short-term goals that you're trying to correct. So you might have 1 or 2 things that you're saying like, that's a real issue for me. I'm going to work on those quite a bit. And then there's maintenance issues. You can really reduce the maintenance issues to a small amount of time, like a couple minutes max. And if it's just something you're maintaining, you do a small amount and move on. You don't have to binge on this stuff and do a lot. Just make sure you're breaking up the idea of short-term goals and long-term maintenance. The other thing is change up the exercises. Not the goals, but the exercises. Having lots of different books or larger books can be really helpful with this, so that your slur exercises aren't always the same. Maybe you'll practice a slur scale, which will engage other parts of your mind while you work on the slurs themselves. Engaging with the thing that you're working on is super important. That's the thing that will make it more interesting. So if you have a clear plan to improve something and you're engaging with it, and you can change up the exercises, not the level of the exercises or the goal or the point of the exercises, but just the exercises themselves, then you can keep it fresh and keep engaged with the exercise. You can even add combine it with a fretboard knowledge thing. So if you're working on slurs, you could also combine it with your knowledge of octaves. So you could be a C to D slur, C to D slur, C to D slur, C to D slur, C to D, C to D. You can practice your fretboard awareness while you're practicing your slurs. You can engage with the exercises a little bit more. Stephen asks, Stefan asks, my bad habit is the reverse of theirs. I fail to set enough time aside for repertoire and get lost in technique exercises. So I think if you can find a way to, first thing, keep your technique session small and efficient. That's of course very important. But also maybe shift some of your technique exercises directly over into your repertoire. So if you have a piece that's has a bunch of slurs in it like that Torrega piece, then maybe you can be you can practice your slurs in combination with the notes in your pieces, so that some of your slur activity comes back into your repertoire. Even though the passage in this passage only requires 1 and 4, requires those, you could still practice other ones. and you can like create a Frankenstein phrase out of your repertoire. I do that a lot, create these little Frankenstein situations where I take a phrase and I add other things to it to work on my technique, because it makes me memorize the phrase and makes me memorize the piece and what I'm working on, but combine it with a more thorough engagement of all the fingers so that it's more balanced. But you can shift, if that's an issue for you, you can shift some of your technique work into your repertoire and engage with your repertoire in that way to bring you back into your repertoire practice more and not get too obsessed with technique work and practice. Herb and Stefan have a similar question. Their bad habit would be jumping from one repertoire piece to another without actually getting it to performance quality, or just like letting a piece lapse and kind of degrade, right, over time. I think that's it's a great question, and it's a very common bad habit for lots of people who are very excited about a new piece that they don't really keep up their other pieces long term. And I completely understand why. It's just the new piece is just so exciting, and you've been working on the other one. It becomes like dull, or becomes a hassle, or you're no longer engaging with it fully. So on the one level, yeah, I mean, obviously I would say like you want to find ways to engage with the pieces, with your older pieces. And when I have a student, of course, students sometimes have to keep their piece for a year or even 2 years, very, very long time to really get it down. But we go through when you're working with a teacher, you go through different phases. Like maybe at first it's a lot of technique work, a lot of memorization work. Later on, it's much more about some of the more musical aspects, the performance, your performance flair, your performance risk levels, and then you start going through different times when maybe students start going to master classes or start playing for people or performing in concerts. And so there's lots of different stages for the piece to go through. But I know that people practicing at home, they don't necessarily go through those phases. One tip I'll say is that you want to structure and balance your practice sessions so that you can enjoy your pieces without feeling guilty about these issues. So you want to play at a high quality level as often as possible, which means that you have to have a certain amount of material that you've maintained and that you can play really well, and then you have new pieces that you're either exploring to play in a full way, or you're just exploring it for fun. Like you're just interested, so you're kind of exploring a piece. You need to balance your practice sessions so that you don't have to feel guilty about looking at new pieces and not bringing them up to the full level. As long as the majority of your practice session you're playing really well at a high quality level, then your playing will be at a high quality level and your muscle memory will be good. You don't have to feel guilty about not bringing a piece to total fruition, right? Instead, make sure enough of your material is easy enough that you have it kind of at performance level and you don't have to maintain it very much. There's easy pieces that I play in my gig book that I've played for years and I don't really have to practice them. I practice them once or twice a week maybe, and I just know those pieces. It's really good to have those pieces so that you can maintain good high quality level playing, but you can still be exploring new content. So I don't think it's really a bad habit so much as an issue with how you've balanced your practice session. So make sure that you're keeping a small set of etudes or pieces that you can play at a high level. That can be part of your technique routine almost, like some of the etudes. And then you have these other pieces that you're exploring. So I would just restructure the way you think of your whole practice session. Think about balancing it and playing at a high quality level most of the time, but don't feel too guilty about certain pieces not reaching the level that you want before moving on. As long as you have some core pieces that you are maintaining at a very high level, then you'll be fine. These days, I'm not playing a lot of concerts because of the website, but for me, like I'm recording all the time, so that forces me to bring pieces to a slightly higher level. You could consider creating a documentary style thing where you really log a piece in. So maybe in your practice session, if you're working on 5 pieces, you choose 3 of them and you say, I'm going to record these 3 and put them on that external hard drive. Even if you never show anyone, you're creating a documented experience of high quality playing by yourself, which could also lead to an awareness of how much you've improved over the years. It's a good project to do, but you don't have to do it with all of your pieces. Zachary asks, sometimes at the end of the day, I play on the couch. Songs that I can already play pretty well, or stuff like memorizing a new scale in thirds or sixths, where it's more of a mental exercise than a physical one. Is this a super bad habit to kind of like probably play on the couch with like not the proper posture and position and all that? Zachary, I would say no, it's not. It's not the end of the world, and it's not necessarily a bad habit. Like I shouldn't talk because like I play my small ukulele at the computer all the time because I'm making additions. Like I might even play it more than I play my actual guitar. But it really depends on what you mean by sometimes and how secure your technique is. When I'm starting lessons with a student or a new student that's come to me, I will very much encourage them to work on the proper sitting position and guitar position, and to be very strict about it, and not go do those other things, the campfire stuff, just until they've secured it and it's in their muscle memory and not going anywhere. After that, it can be very healthy for students to, hang out with the guitar and play, I know students that have only sat in the proper position, and then when, I'll have like an end of year get together with them, we'll all be sitting around like strumming some pop songs instead of our classical stuff. And they won't feel like comfortable like sitting around playing their instrument, which that's not very healthy. You want to be able to just sit around and play. But nevertheless, it just depends on where you're at and what you mean by sometimes. Obviously, the majority of the time you should practice with proper technique. If that's your goal, to play properly, then the majority of the time you want to do that. If you're sitting around sometimes and strumming chords and you're relaxed and you're not ruining your body or something, I think that's just fine. Okay, Sharon and Bill ask a similar question. I find myself slouching sometimes and try to correct this whenever I notice. I put a mirror in front of myself, but I revert soon afterwards. Yeah, posture is a real issue. I think for myself, my posture is not perfect and I do slouch a lot. But when I was really noticing it was a problem for my playing, I had to integrate it into my whole life. And actually, I think I talked to a physiotherapist about it and tried to get some tips from like Alexander technique and other techniques that people use for physical things. Integrating it into your whole life is actually probably what you want to look at. So like when you're sitting at the computer or at the table, at the dinner table or something like that, you want to be aware of like, how does your spine how is your spine like a pillar for your body, and how do your muscles relax off that pillar, and how comfortable is it, and how do I find a way to make it comfortable? And then you start doing it not just for guitar, but in all the other parts of your life, so that it becomes like a thing that you are really always aware of and it's integrated into your life. I really think that that's the only way to approach posture and slouching issues, is to really look at very much look at it in terms of your entire life experience, rather than just like for your half hour or hour a day practice session. That's really hard to correct something like that when it's such a small part of your day. If you make it part of your larger day, you might really make some progress. At the same time, like I said, at the end of each phrase, head up, but relaxed. Straight pillar of a spine, but relaxed. At the end of each phrase, and then you move on and do the next phrase. And you just continue to remind yourself in connection with some kind of musical element like that. And you'll find it actually becomes like a muscle memory habit. Andy asks, or mentions, my bad habit involves being too tense while I practice. Far too often I find myself tense in both my hands and arms. I've already addressed this question a little bit with the other things, but yeah, at the end of each phrase, muscle relax. I've actually done this with students where I'll make them do it at the end of each phrase so many times in a lesson that when I leave the room and come back or something like that, I'll notice them, like, I notice their shoulders actually will do it at the end of a phrase and they don't even know they're doing it because we did it so many times that it became part of their muscle memory to relax at the end of the phrase. So the idea of like, oh, I'm going to relax through the whole piece, that's probably not something you'll be able to concentrate on and be able to do. It's the end goal, of course, but it's not something you can do right now. Because it just creeps up and you can't be occupied with that while you're playing your pieces all the time. But at the end of a phrase, if you relax your tempo a little bit at the end of a phrase, you can actually do a muscle memory relaxation and release of the tension that you've built up. And I think that's the way you want to start doing that. And make sure you also start with some relaxation exercises. Great exercises like muted exercises, where you are doing the movements, but without the pressure. So in this particular exercise, I get to do the left hand movements, but you can see I'm not pushing the string down to the fret. So it's super light in the left hand, but I'm practicing the movements. So it's a great way to practice the movements without the tension. It's also a great way of disassociating. Like in this hand, I can dig in hard, but not in this hand. And, usually the hands will increase each other's tension. Like if you're digging in hard with this hand, you start squeezing with this hand. They're very associated. So disassociating that is great. You can dig in hard with this hand, but this hand's relaxed. So that's two things. So integrating it into your phrasing, but also finding exercises that push the issue to the forefront. Shravan asks about his right hand position is not always correct. And like I said, I don't necessarily think this is a bad habit so much as just something you need to work on, right? But he says that I tend to be too close to the strings, resulting in small movements and clawing motions that don't start from the base of the knuckle, so probably more like here. For the last month, I've been doing open string exercises in an effort to fix it, but I revert back. So in this particular case, I very much encourage exercises that encourage the awareness. So Raschiato exercises are great for that. And before you practice the scale even, like you could add a Raschiato before, even just with open strings even. And then at the end, like just that forces you to kind of be aware that, oh, I'm collapsing. So it won't be as easy for you to revert back to your bad habit. Instead, you'll be able to be aware of it more often by practicing that. Another great one is the follow-through exercise. So when you take your right hand and you bring your finger in and you touch your palm afterwards, that's another great exercise that encourages the awareness of an issue. Because if you're all cramped like this, you can't bring your finger back into the palm. It's impossible. You'll get stuck. So by bringing your finger in towards the palm, it's almost like a Raschiato, that you need that clearance and openness in the hand to actually go and touch the palm. We wouldn't touch our palm when we're actually playing a stroke on guitar, but as an exercise, that can be really useful. You can even do it with chords, that your hand is going to come back and touch your palm. So that can be very, very useful in that regard. So exercises that build the awareness, and do them often throughout your practice session. Edward asks, also on a right hand issue, the ring and pinky fingers tend to curl into my palm, which means that my ring finger is not always ready when needed. I've tried lots of things to keep them relaxed, but they just tend to tense up. So we just talked about the idea of like movement in the hand. So I think for you, like the Raschiato could help just like get some more finger independence going in the right hand, especially slow Raschiato where one finger at a time. And And also just even if you're going back and forth, it encourages them to just not lock into a position and just to be moving. So that's a good just exercise in itself. Also arpeggio exercises where there's a expansion and contraction kind of idea where let's say you were playing P, P, M, A, P, M, A, P, M, A, and then you start to expand. Even expand between the A and the M fingers. So like maybe M and A are playing on these two strings, and then the A fingering jumps. But you know, just getting those fingers to like open up, contract, and expand can be very helpful for that particular issue. And also just more playing with MA, you know, like more pieces or studies or techniques that involve MA more often so that they're more active more often. You know, start practicing your scales with MA a lot. Practice arpeggio patterns that, you know, encourage the use of A more often. You could also do planting exercises that get the fingers planted. The more that you engage it and open up your hand and learn to relax as well, the more that's going to help. And then integrate those into your practice session throughout. So just make a plan that you're going to play some of those arpeggio exercises every 5 minutes maybe, or at the end of each phrase of a piece, or like especially if there's a piece that particularly is causing the tension. Maybe just at the end of each phrase you need to relax and open up your hand. Maybe it's just a tension issue. So there's lots of ways to go about it without seeing your exact technique or your hand. You know, it's hard for me to say exactly what to do, but definitely integrating more of those ideas more often, I think, is the short-term thing that you want to get going on. Shravan asks, regarding the left hand, I have a bad habit of a slight violin position. He played violin for like 25 years, so it's very deeply ingrained in his left hand. And so I'm assuming that he's like this or like this, you know, like something like that. He says, I do alignment exercises every day, but when I go to playing, I switch back. Exercises that would encourage your awareness of these issues would be definitely things like thirds. You know, like that's a great one. If your hand is misaligned, like even a slight misalignment, I can't even do that. It's so painful and impossible. If I relax my arm and bring my hand into position. So, I'm just suggesting an alignment exercise, of course, but maybe it's something that you have to integrate into your pieces very often. Other things like fixed fingers exercises are really useful, where you plant two fingers, you know, and have to play. That can be really useful. But I'm kind of bringing up technique issues. If you play violin for 25 years, it's going to be a tough one to break. But, you know, you may want to like I was saying, you know, identifying an issue and creating a plan. You may want to create a plan where all of your technique exercises are things that encourage, you know, take a break from scales and take a break from some other things and just do exercises that encourage the behavior of alignment. And pick pieces that do too. Pick some studies in thirds and sixths, you know, or even like source studies that just have thirds very often. You know, do some research, find some pieces that have, you know, multi-finger engagement that forces the issue. And they can be very enjoyable pieces. There's some really great pieces out there that have thirds and stuff in them. So maybe start creating a plan that the majority of your repertoire will be content that encourages this, because it sounds like this is going to be something that's a little bit tough for you to break, Don't let it, put you off or something, but start integrating more pieces, and you can slowly just integrate the pieces. And then maybe in a couple months from now, you'll have a bunch of pieces that you're playing that encourage the behavior that you want. And that will just be your guitar playing session. It'll be stuff that encourages that, which would be just a constant reminder that you have to do it, and won't easily allow you to revert to the other position. Brian asks, one habit I have is to allow the left hand to move away from the neck over time. Whether that, I'm not sure if he means like this way or just like a misalignment of the hand. But the result is that, especially in chords, incorporating notes on the sixth string are not solid. So, I mean, a lot of the time for me, it's engaging in more exercises that engage all of the fingers. Whether it be like, I have a fourth finger issue. Like my fourth finger just likes to just drift away. So I'll do lots of exercises where my fourth finger is super engaged. So for example, like 1 4 3 4 2 4 1 4 3 4 2 4 1 4 3 4 2 4. Or I'll do lots of fixed finger and counterpoint exercises, which especially with technique exercises, it just engages all the fingers. So things like a very generic one. I think in Pumping Nylon it's called like O'Dare's Drill. In my book, it's just a chromatic line on each voice, right? It's the same exercise pretty much, but you can see like it's engaging all the fingers. So like there's always fingers on the fretboard and there's always fingers being engaged. So there's no opportunity for the hands to drift away. Fixed finger exercises we've kind of talked about, where you might fix like 1 and 4 and practice using the other fingers. It's really great, especially if you can learn to relax during those exercises. So like you really work on it both from a technical standpoint and a relaxation standpoint. It's a great way of like encouraging your hand to be like super close and economical in terms of where it is on the fretboard, but really engaged as well. And that mix of engaged and fixed can help with that. It's something that you'll definitely want to apply everything I've said. Like do it at the beginning of your practice session, so hopefully it permeates the practice session a little bit. Check after each phrase in small sections, just so that you're on top of it more often. But that's another technique an issue that you can't concentrate about it at all times, or it would kind of ruin your whole musical practice session. So do some dedicated practice techniques on it at the beginning of your practice session. So hopefully it permeates or bleeds into the rest of your session a little bit. But also, after each phrase, check your hand so that you're still playing lots of music, but you're working on it. And also you might want to just like integrate some. You do a little phrase. You can do a little technique exercise every once in a while to get your hand back kind of in the zone, so to speak, and then carry on. But yeah, that's definitely a long-term one that you'll want to have a long-term plan for, that you work on. And if you can hopefully track your progress a little bit, you'll realize that over time that it is getting better, and you just keep working on it. Scott asks, I played electric guitar for many years, and now I'm learning classical and find the fretting hand position of the thumb behind the fingers on the neck is uncomfortable. So like a lot of electric guitar players, for those who don't know, will, because the neck is so small, they'll kind of grip it like this, so to speak, or some variation of that. Whereas in classical, we kind of generally have this kind of hand position where the thumb is behind the neck and our fingers are up like this. So he's saying, I can fret better using the thumb over the top or thumb further down the neck towards the headstock than the fretting fingers. Should I force myself to play in the traditional way? Or is there a benefit I'm not seeing? Yeah, so Scott, there is a benefit you're not seeing, but it's one of those funny issues because right now, like, I don't know what level you're at and what stuff you're playing, but you might be able to play your pieces right now really well without proper technique. And that's always a tough one for students because, like, if you can play your stuff right now and you're not seeing the benefit, then, like, what's your incentive? What's your motivation to improve it other than people telling you to? And I really can understand that. And I've had lots of electric students cross over to classical and they have a similar issue. The one issue that you just want to be aware of is that it's an unknown future goal. Is that I've had students that they just don't see the benefit of correcting it, so they don't work on it. But then they reach a certain level and they want to start playing more advanced repertoire, but their technique is not set up for it. And correcting that issue is a very long term, like those kinds of ingrained habits are a very long term issue that you want to work on. But if a student suddenly gets motivated to play more advanced repertoire, it's an issue because I have to say, like, oh, we have to go through a long term technique correction before you can play anything like Bach counterpoint, for example, where all the fingers are engaged. And if your thumb's up here, like, you might want to try just doing even like something like this. Or like, sorry. So like A and C with B and D. You'll find it, I think, pretty tough to do with this hand position. You don't have the finger clearance necessarily to play close to the frets and to do it with relaxation. So I'm just showing you that, not as something necessarily that you want to practice, although it's a good scales and thirds will show you that that's an issue. But it's like a future awareness thing where your future goals will be connected to your hand position. And although right now it might not be interfering with your playing, sometime in the future it probably will. So I would recommend that you try some scales and thirds. Just a basic scale, C scale in thirds. Especially that combination there. And you'll that or scales in octaves or some of these. Very common one for electric students is like in pumping nylon. I'm just using that as an example because everyone knows it. But O'Dair's drill. Electric players find this exercise very difficult if they're doing it properly. If you're actually holding one note down while you play the other one. So there's always one finger on the fretboard. You will find that it's impossible to do with this hand. With the thumb over, it's impossible to do. You won't get past like the third string. Once you go to the sixth string, I can't even reach the... So you could just try doing that, even like... that exercise is impossible to do with the thumb over. And that is the thing that will show you that, like, oh, well, when you look at complicated pro players playing complicated pieces, their fingers are like this, right? They're doing all sorts of stuff. You will learn very quickly that that hand position is just not going to work for that repertoire. And so it's something that if you want to play repertoire like that, that is something you'll want to correct. As a teacher, I have to encourage you to correct your technique and play in the proper way in case you plan to play that kind of repertoire. But I know that's not everyone's goal, so it is up to you. But the caution, especially for me as a teacher, is that if I bring a student up to a certain level, if they get serious about playing, it's going to be a problem later on and a much more difficult one to solve later. It's much easier to gradually approach your hand position and your technique. The more you ingrain something, the harder it is to get out of your technique. So, yeah, my advice is definitely to start looking at exercises like the ones I've talked about, finger independence exercises, fixed fingered exercises, and you'll slowly start to see that that technique just doesn't work for those exercises. Therefore, it probably won't work for the repertoire that's coming up. At the same time, think of it long term. Integrate some of those exercises into the beginning of your practice session so you start gradually building awareness. You don't have to completely revamp your your whole technique and not enjoy music anymore because you're trying to correct this thing, you can integrate it slowly and start seeing the benefit and seeing where things are going and work on it long term. Eddie asks, I tend not to look at my left hand even at slow speeds, thus the accuracy and dexterity becomes lower. Sometimes I rely on luck on hitting the right note, especially when sight reading. Yeah, and I've seen you play, Eddie, because you've sent me some of the videos of your playing, and it's not luck. You have skills. Like, I've seen you play, Eddie, and you play very accurately for someone at your level. So, like, if you're playing 98% of the notes accurately, that's not luck. That's skill. So you have lots of skill, and I don't think it's luck is the right word for it. And I know you put that in quotations, so you're hinting at that. But nevertheless, yes, you do have to learn to rely on your left hand. And I will, especially with technique exercises, I will often look closely at my hand at first, and make sure that I'm close to the frets and I'm not missing anything. But then I will look away and make sure I can do it using the skills I've built up, not luck. So yeah, I would for your technique work and your pieces, yes, memorize passages and look at your left hand. It's very healthy to do that. But then look away, yeah. And when you're sight reading, you have to rely on your skills. But definitely, I look at my left hand during technique exercises in particular, because your technique is the muscle memory model for what you're doing. So you want to learn to do that. Shift exercises. Whoa, I missed that one. But I will look first. And make sure I can do the shift, and then I'll start doing it without looking and seeing if I can get those shifts. And so you build an awareness of the scale length of the guitar and the distance of the frets, and you build that skill up over time. So yeah, you're doing great. I wouldn't worry about it. Just in your technique work, it's something to make sure you're looking carefully at, and then testing your skills by looking away. Final question is Ed, and he asks, he's actually just kind of looking for some advice, more than adding a bad habit issue, but he's interested in ways to connect notes while moving from chord to chord. And if I were to put this in the context of bad habits, yes, I think that people, when they practice going from chord to chord, like even in the Giuliani arpeggios, they don't actually have a plan that they're using. They kind of practice doing it over and over. When we practice transitioning from one chord to the next, whether it be like, that's a common one in the Giuliani arpeggios. We can't just practice that over and over. We have to have a method. So often with students, I'll just break it into two simple ways of doing it. First, you practice the chord shapes. Until your left hand is aware of the overall shape and the requirements of the technique of holding those two shapes. You can even do it, turn your Giuliani exercise into a little chord strummer song, but aware of the full shape, but then being ultra aware of actually what notes occur next. So that bass note is the only note that actually occurs next when you're playing that transition between the two chords. And then that one with your fourth finger, and then first finger. So you don't actually have to get all of the notes in each chord right away if the piece is like broken up in this manner, right? So practicing it solid teaches you the overall muscle memory of the shape, but practicing it very slowly with an attention to the fact that what note actually occurs next is the thing break those two things up and practice them separately, because it's this one that is the way you'll get it sounding legato and connected, but it's the solid form that teaches you the overall shape and muscle memory of the idea. The issue for most people is that they're usually strong enough players that they can kind of like just play it, and their hand knows the shapes well enough to kind of switch, but then as they're playing it so fast that they can't concentrate on the individual note to note to note movements. The sequence of events isn't clear in their minds because they kind of have enough playing skill to just do it. But if you really separate those things and really codify the movements a little bit, you'll realize that as you get faster, you can transition with only the movements that are needed, which saves you just split seconds here and there and makes the transitions more legato and smooth, because you're actually also holding notes. Like I'm still holding that C there until I actually hear and play the next bass note of the next chord. Most people, they have little interruptions between the two because they haven't actually connected it and thought about this. It's not that they haven't thought about it, but they haven't thought about it clearly enough and really broken it down. The more that you break it down like that, even the most complicated changes in other pieces can be thought of in the same way. When you have a big shift to an upper position chord shape, sometimes you just need to get that first note instead of the whole shape, and that's the thing you need to work on. There's a lot of other advice I could give there, but in terms of bad habits and practicing, that's what I'll mention. Very long session today. Thank you for everyone who submitted questions. I hope the idea of making a plan and finding dedicated exercises for your specific problems really came through today, and also just relaxing and making all the ideas integrated into your whole session so you can still enjoy music and correct those bad habits over the long term.